1 minute.
We're doing a risk and resiliency assessment now. We had that meeting. Was it last week or the week before? It all kind of runs together.
Certainly in sports when I go.
What are all the risks of
Definitely.
Yeah.
bad things happening to
In
our
fact, they were
intake or water plant?
I want to say it was probably.
Yeah, it was interesting. There were cards.
Yeah, in the 90s. There was a fight. There was, when I was in high school, there were fights after basketball games. The famous one at Taco Bell in downtown Davis. Between the two high schools. Yeah, the football coach for Davis, Dave Whitmire, was a very close family friend. If he had caught me wearing orange, seriously, he would have at least said something.
Is that thing manned 24/7?
Yeah, yeah, it is. Well, they really would love to not have to have
They kind of tabled the discussion. Because they were about ready to go to the interview and try to make a case to do that.
Thank you, Camille. We're glad you're here. Everybody ready to go?
I'm ready.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's 3 p.m. This is the January 16, 2020 meeting of the Woodland-Davis Clean Water Agency. Welcome. Roll call will show that all members are present with the exception of our county representative, Supervisor Don Saylor. Approval of the agenda. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda?
Move approval.
Move approval. Second?
Second.
Second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. The agenda will be pursued as submitted. Time for public comment. Do you want to comment? Do you want to say anything?
Don't encourage him.
Do you like the water you're drinking at home?
Yeah, where did we go today? What did I show you? Where does the water come from? The river.
Very good. You get 2 tries. Yeah, you did great on the second try. Well, we're glad you're here. That will conclude public comment for today. Agency business, we are showing a closed session to begin. Mr. General Manager, do you have an estimate of the amount of time necessary for the closed session?
Probably 15 minutes or so. There's not a very large update today.
All right. So it's now just after 3. I expect us back here by 3:20, and we'll continue. And your little ones are welcome as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so we'll.
Don't care much.
We're going to do our closed session right here. I see. Okay. All right. Proceed, Mr. General Manager.
Unbelievable.
The total at issue now is multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Jeez, that's real money.
It is real change. On the next fee increase.
I did too.
Welcome back. Welcome back. Sorry to keep you out of the room for a while. All right, this, continuing on with agency business, item 2 is consent items. This is our minutes of our prior
Tom,
and special meetings.
if we just let the record reflect that there was no reportable action in the closed session.
Thank you, Dick. I appreciate that. Remember, no reportable action. So anyway, 3 items on the consent report.
Move the consent calendar.
Second.
Thank you. We have motion second to approve the consent calendar as indicated on the agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 3 is our report from our general manager on an update on operations for our agency.
Hi, good afternoon. Stan is not able to be here today, so I will be covering the operations report for him. Relatively short agenda today for the update. For real topics, talking about the erosion control at the joint intake. It's a project we're looking to potentially do this summer. An update on where we are with the water supply risk and alternatives evaluation. Kind of update you on the US EPA water resiliency case study that we were part of last year. Kind of an interesting way that turned out, and then our normal operations update. Over at the joint intake, we did some erosion control repairs this past summer. We had Lister Construction come back. The picture on the left shows kind of real erosion from the top of the levee. We put a few locations of those, but if you recall, the river was relatively high until May, June this year, I think into June, before it really went back down. In July, we went out there and looked at it, and we noticed the picture on the right-hand side shows the south side of the joint intake. There's a significant amount of erosion that has occurred just above the water line. There's kind of a ledge that shows it there. It's hard to tell in the picture, but that's about a 2-foot drop-off vertically. So there is erosion that's occurring south side of the joint intake facility. There's actually an eddy in the river that we think is contributing to that erosion. So we're looking for a permanent fix of that because it is the Sacramento River levee. Right on top of the levee slope is our fence and parking lot that we actually do use. So we're looking to put together a project for dealing with that. We did ask the resource agencies if this could be considered a maintenance activity and therefore not requiring permits. They said, no, we need to do full permitting. So there's, if we do full permitting, we need full design. So we're designing a rock slope protection project with permitting. There's a couple items for board consideration today for the contracts with both West Yost and ASA to do the design and permitting respectively. The plan is to try to get that work completed this summer. This is a common facilities issue. So per our agreement with RD 2035, the expectation is that they would cover 80% of the cost of this work, and we would cover 20% of the cost. RD 2035 is aware of the erosion, so we've had some relatively high-level conversations with them about this so far. And as we get further into design, get a real cost estimate, we'll meet with them again on the cost sharing for that. Any questions on the joint intake erosion?
Is there a sense that the fix it's not going to happen again after a few years, or?
Ideally, we will get it built this summer. It depends a bit on how the water year ends up and how high the Sacramento River stays later into the year. Last year, it stayed fairly high into June, so there's restrictions on when you can get into the river depending on water levels. There's no way a person can start prior to April 15th. And then if we're considered in water, the start date is after July 1 due to fish spawning seasons. So there's a couple different environmental criteria. I don't know that we have to deal with the fish issue, but definitely levee stability issue. So sometime after April 15th, we would be doing the work. On the north side of the intake, however, we do have a significant amount of rock slope protection, so we've not noticed any issues up there. This was an issue back from the original construction of the facility. It was designed on the north side, but not on the south side. I want to give a quick update on where we are with the water supply risk and alternatives evaluation. There's a couple different areas that we are working on right now. One of the main things we started out with was updating the existing and future demands for the cities and UC Davis. The 2009 document we had relatively higher growth projections and higher demand projections going forward. What we've noticed since that time, really starting in 2012 to 2016 timeframe, and it's true for both Woodland and Davis, and I think a lesser extent UC Davis, is that our demands had actually dropped significantly. For example, Woodland today is still 30% or so lower than we were in 2013. So one aspect of this work is really to look at what is a more realistic current demand and what's a more realistic demand increase going forward. Historically, in water supply, we would use 5% per year annual increase. That's just not true. So for Woodland, we're using 1.7%. I think Davis and UC Davis are somewhere similar to that. That we're using much lower future growth due to higher efficiency appliances in houses, no landscaping in the front yards, that kind of stuff. So we're reducing our future demands, essentially. Part of that is also looking at future supply needs. Each city and UC Davis do have backup supplies. So part of this analysis is looking at to what extent would the project partners use their alternative supplies in the event of a dry year and inability for the agency to supply 100% supply to everyone. And so basically to kind of bracket what water supply deficit would we actually have. The other thing we're working on right now is modeling the Sacramento River system. We looked at 82 years of data from 1922 to 2003, I believe it was, the water years. And that's in the DWR's calcium model, using that to update where we think Term 91 curtailments would take place and in which months and in which years. It's a bit of science and human interaction, I guess, is the way to put it. There's not really a purely mathematical way to calculate this, as it turns out. There are certainly factors as reservoir storage, flows in the river, what rainfall did we get that winter, but there's also a lot of other factors that are not quite, that cannot quite be calculated. So we're working on a good look forward on that. And the next thing we're going to be starting, I don't know if we're quite on these two items yet, is kind of qualitatively assessing what are the future risks to water supply in Sacramento River. There's a few things going on. It was in the news today that they're looking to do the Delta Tunnel. There are significant concerns on if they built that, they can take roughly half the flow in the Sacramento River to the south. What does that do to Term 91 curtailment? Can that affect it? It's something we'll have to look at a high level. And then also the unimpaired flows in Sacramento River and what that may change reservoir storage and therefore Term 91 curtailment. So those are both highly questionable at this time as to what effects they may have. We're not analyzing it in detail, but it is going to be noted in the report as something that we're going to have to analyze. And then as part of this, we're also looking at alternative supply sources. We're already starting to look at that as what, if we're really looking at two time periods. It's summer months. If we have a curtailment starting early and going through end of October, if it's a Shasta critical year, we'll have a supply deficit during summer months with our 10,000 acre feet. Do we want to supplement that? And then the other category is November through March. Is if we have a curtailment in winter, we have no access to either water supply or water right, or what do we do in that case? We are planning on having a, depending on how the schedule really works out, either in April or June, more of a full update to the board on where we are with that study. I wanted to highlight this real quickly. It's actually kind of an interesting, the way it turned out. So as you may recall, last summer, we were involved as a recommendation from Division of Drinking Water to participate in EPA. It's a climate change resiliency study. So the agency and the project partners participated with EPA. It was really led by EPA as a case study in how our water utility and our respective project partners are set up to deal with future climate-related changes. And so we did that, several conference calls and meetings, did a presentation, I think it was in July last year, with EPA. And it turns out, they, after those meetings, they updated their website. And the website that's shown on this slide is a link to their water resiliency page. And the Woodland-Davis Clean Water Agency and project partners are the poster child in the United States for water resiliency as a success story.
I must say, I love seeing the old water tower there, long gone now, but I mean, I wish we could have saved it as a historic, building, but it's gone, so not forgotten.
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting that we ended up being like the national poster child for water resiliency as a success story. So that's the link to the website, and then there's a case study page which has the detailed analysis that was done for our agency and how we stack up against the category that was selected. We selected drought because in our view that was kind of the biggest risk we really have over, forest fires, hurricanes, snow, that kind of stuff. So we picked drought and stacked up very well as an agency and project partners. Moving on to operations, the water treatment plant and intake continue to operate well right now. We're at about 15.5 million gallons per day, and the breakdown is Woodland is using right around 9 million gallons per day. About 4 million of that is being injected into the ASR wells, and Davis is using about 5.1 million, and UC Davis about 1.4 million currently. I think we report this every time. We continue to meet all regulatory and contract water quality requirements, and we do continue to update our website with water quality information as we have it and diversion quantities. There is some work going on over at the intake right now. As you may recall, I think this started well over a year ago. The board approved work at the pumps to change the pump's lubrication system from water to oil. When the first pumper was removed, we realized that there was significant wear on the inside of the pumps. That was due to the bottom bearing being the incorrect bearing. After a lot of research, we found out that it was hard to blame somebody for that. So we approved a project about a year ago to actually replace the bottom bearings, do re-chroming of the pump shafts to repair the damage that was done to them, and then also convert them to the oil, which was the original project. That work is underway. It took quite a while to order all the parts and get everything set up. One pump is being removed at a time. I think 2 of them are now done, and they're on the 3rd one right now. It takes a few weeks for each one. So the pictures below, the bottom left picture shows the pump as it's being removed from the building itself. The part that's darker color, that's the part that actually sits in the water normally. And then on the right-hand side is what it looks like being helped from a crane. So we actually had to bring in a pretty tall crane to lift this thing out of the joint intake and then bring it over to the truck to bring it in for servicing. Another thing that happened,
That with all of our, we have 2 pumps or 4 pumps?
we have 4.
All 4 of them are getting that treatment,
Yes,
one at a time, I
Yep.
presume?
yes. Yeah, we can deliver full flow from the intake with 3 of the pumps and 1 of them out of service. So that'll be completed in the short term. The other thing that's happened recently is the CH did clean the screens on the intake. We pulled the screens one by one and actually pressure washed them to clean off all the algae, clams, sponges, sediment that's accumulated on them over the past couple of years. So there's a few pictures of that. They do end up looking a little bit dirty after being in the water for a few years. We were able to clean 9 of the 10 screens. The screen on the south side, we could not reach with the crane. It stops a little bit, yeah. It stops a little bit short of being able to be centered over the screen to lift it up straight. Basically, the screens are 20 feet long and 40 feet tall. You need to be able to position the crane directly over it in order to lift the thing. It's a very tight fit. And we could not do that with the 10th screen, so that one was left uncleaned. Working on a solution, there's a couple options that may work out. The crane does run on tracks, and the tracks end about 6 inches or so after the stop that stops it from moving further. We could get enough inches by moving the stop further back, so we're checking whether or not structurally we can do that, and can we still have crane certification if we did that. And the other option that we would have is modifying the boom of the crane itself. But again, we're concerned with making sure we don't lose our crane certification. So
Certification?
the crane itself is certified to lift a certain loading for safety reasons. We would want to make sure that we don't have any issues with that. So it's something we're looking at. We can operate with 9 of the 10 screens and the 10th one not being cleaned. I think we would have the ability to do a lot of the cleaning work from the water, but it'd be significantly more expensive than it is to just simply lift it out.
So it's not just that you can't clean it, but you can't pull it for whatever reason. If there's
Correct.
It's damaged, if there's something, corroded. Okay. Corroded,
Yes.
yeah, whatever.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's another thing we found. There's a couple more pictures of the screen, both dirty on the left and clean on the right. So it's, yeah.
Like licking the batter when you're making brownies, you just have to get that out.
Yeah, and we do have a pressure sensor on both sides of the screens, and even though the picture on the left looks like it's pretty solidly blocked, we didn't notice any real change in water level on both sides of the screen, so they still fully function with that much of occlusion on them.
Did we get any, like, permeation of refuse or anything that gets through the screen, even when it's extra, if it's dirty? Did we find more stuff on our side of the screen?
No,
Okay.
no, we don't see anything on our side of the screen. The screens are, you could put a dime through the screen opening, but not a nickel, is how narrow they are. So so nothing really ever gets through it. The only thing that would happen is that we just lose more surface
Dimes?
area. We could lose dimes.
Okay.
It's a very narrow diameter that allows anything through. On the transformer failure that we experienced several months ago, there has been a spare high voltage relay installed, so we do have a bit of a backup now for that, and we're still waiting the forensic analysis report on why it actually failed, because it was an unexpected failure. There's another item we've been working on for quite a while. The contract with Jacobs stipulates that they monitor compliance for the City of Davis and UC Davis water quality at what we call the Woo Shack, which is the shack that's just north of the City of Davis. For about 2 years, they've been doing comparison testing both at the plant itself and at that shack to determine whether or not there's any difference in water quality between the two. And there really isn't. The only thing that changes is chlorine drops 0.1 parts per million, which is expected because as chlorine has time, it declines a little bit, but everything else is identical. So Jacobs has requested, and the agency agreed, that the compliance point be moved to the plant rather than at the shack. The reason for that is somebody has to drive there every day just to take some samples. But if there's no difference in water quality, it saves having to have an extra person at the plant or having nobody at the plant for a brief period of time to go take some samples. City of Woodland has always been tested at the plant. It was just Davis and UC Davis that was away just because of the pipeline to get there. Another thing that's being worked on is Woodland has requested that the plant be allowed to operate on pressure versus flow. Right now, the project partners receive water on a flow basis. Basically, each city sets how many million gallons per day or a specific flow rate they want, and the agency or the plant delivers that. The cities and UC Davis can make changes whenever they want, and the plant complies with that. Woodland's requested to try to do a pressure-based approach, which is a bit different in that the flow to Woodland would float based on the pressure in the city, so the flow would go up or down. So there's a couple things that Woodland's looking into as whether or not that's truly feasible, and Jacobs on their end whether or not they can handle that within their existing programming in the plant or what changes would need to happen. So that's something that may happen in the near future. Another thing we've been working on, this is kind of a very low priority issue that's kind of been around for a while, is PCP property. It's actually City of Woodland property that PCP farms along the pipeline to Davis, just a little bit south of the water treatment plant. What we have there is the Conaway's Highline irrigation canals on the far west end of the property. The agency's pipeline to Davis is just east of that canal, and then PCP farms just east of our pipeline. Since construction has ended, from what we've been told, there is now seepage that shows up occasionally on the ground. Their claim,
Occasionally,
oh, sorry?
only occasionally.
Yeah.
That's strange.
Well, the canal's not always full of water. So their contention is that somehow our pipeline project made some sort of a conduit from Conaway's irrigation canal to the farm field. Whether or not that's true is what we're investigating, and whether, even if it is, would we do anything about it? So it's kind of a low priority issue that we're kind of looking at, but we can't really do it until there's water in the canal, and that won't happen again until April. That I can take any questions.
Questions, board? Thank you, good report.
No, thank you for all this work.
Yeah.
Sure.
Always something.
Thank you.
Just out of my curiosity, when you talk about crane certification, it's not our crane. This is something that we have a contractor come in with a crane, right?
No, we have a crane there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's jointly owned between the agency and RD 2035.
Okay, and so we have it, we operate it, and we need some sort of certification, I assume? So
Yes.
It's a big piece of equipment, and,
Yep.
oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, the crane is certified to lift so many pounds safely, and if we were to make changes to it, we could void that certification.
Sure.
All right. That concludes your report. That brings us to item 4 on our agenda, fiscal year 1920 budget update. Is that back to you again, or is that over to you, Paul?
That's also me.
Back to Tim,
Yeah.
okay.
So the mid-year, as is typical, we do a mid-year budget update right at the January meeting. Overall, the budget looks very good. The board approved a $20.11 million operating budget for 2019-20, or 1920 fiscal year. Of that budget, roughly $10.6 million is debt service, so about half of our total budget is paying back the SRF loans, and the 9.45 is our operations and maintenance budget. The budget information that was in your packet includes actual expenditures through end of November, and we anticipated through end of December to get the true 6-month period. And then there's also a projection through the end of the fiscal year to kind of get a picture of as to where we may end up at the end of the year. I'd like to start out with the decreases first, because that's the good news, is where we are underspending our budget. There's really 3 main categories of that. There's a few other minor things under agency expenses were a couple $100 plus or minus. We don't generally get into the detail on those unless you would like to. But there's really 3 main items where we are fairly significantly underspending. The first one is electricity and pass-through chemicals. Collectively, that's almost a $400,000 underspending that we're currently at. It's really due to a couple things. One thing, we want to be a little bit conservative in forecasting. We forecast how much water we are going to use for the entire year in June. So we do that without knowing whether or not it's a hot summer. We do that without knowing whether or not it's a wet or dry winter coming up. So we want to make sure we have all of our bases covered for that. The other thing that happened this year is Woodland did some testing of one of the ASR wells where they pumped a significant amount of water out of one of the ASR wells to do some testing, which reduced demand from the agency. So right now we're looking at roughly $400,000 under budget on that line item. That could change a bit if we end up with a dry winter, dry spring. We could end up seeing those decreases be reduced. The next item is we're about $180,000 under we're expected for the water supply risk and alternatives evaluation. That's primarily due to, we're not changing the budget for that item, but the start date seems to have shifted back a bit. So we had originally projected that all of the money would be expended in this fiscal year, but really some of it's going to be the next fiscal year. So it's the same total budget, just in a different fiscal year. And the other item is our operations contingency. We have $450,000 budgeted in that category. Currently, we are not expecting to use any of that money. You may recall when the budget was approved in June that we used to have every year a 10% contingency on certain items and 5% on others. This year, we reduced it a bit, went to a 5% global contingency on operations and maintenance. When we get into the next budget cycle, we can get into whether or not 5% is the appropriate number. If we're doing something different, it'd be interesting to me, why would we pick 3% or 4%? 5's a round number is why we went with it. But the money that we underspend does get returned back to the partners in the following fiscal year. There's a few items that are actually new since the budget was approved. The first one, and this is actually on the agenda today for consideration, is $135,000 to complete the America's Water Infrastructure Act Risk and Resiliency Assessment and Emergency Response Plan. What this is, the federal government passed a law back in October of 2018. It's through EPA, and they require agencies to basically do a new vulnerability assessment, looking at things like cyber terrorism, actual vandalism, actual terrorism, earthquakes, fires, anything that may be a risk to our utilities. We have a very early deadline. We supply water to more than 100,000 customers. So our deadline is March 31 for the risk and resiliency, and then September 30 for the emergency response plan. This was something that was not highly publicized by EPA. Most water agencies found out about this fairly recently. I don't think they even had the guidelines out in June when our budget was approved. So that's one item. The next two I'll take together. This is for the joint intake erosion control, both the design and the permitting. Those are also on the agenda for today for consideration. Contract with West Yost and also ESA for the design and permitting respectively. And then the last one, it was a bit of a surprise how much work this was to do. The joint intake completion project had to close out all the permits for the project, was also included closing out all the permits from the original joint intake project. It was a bit of an effort to formally close out all of the permits that we had. They went and reviewed all the permit conditions that we had from all the various permits, and then RD 2035 had requested that all be documented in a memo, which I think makes some sense, and then also include in that what ongoing reporting requirements would we have under the various permits. So that was work that ESA did to get that completed for us. The conclusion with our budget is we feel that our budget is in very good shape. We're not requesting any budget amendments at this time. Can take any questions.
That's an outstanding report. Camille?
Just curious on the last item, the 17,000. Is this a shared cost with RD 2035 since it's a shared permitting responsibility?
No, it's an agency-only expense. The agreement we had with RD 2035, and maybe I'll take to help you out with this one, is that there's certain expenses that RD 2035 would cover. Anything over that is 100% agency expense. So the completion project as a whole was 100% agency expense. The permit closeout was also 100% agency expense.
Yeah, there was a special arrangement on closing out the joint intake, and that was part of the settlement.
Will, question?
Nope, thank you.
Anybody on?
Very quick, just a brief question. Woodland saved a lot of money because of electricity, and we were using 10 million gallons a day. Is that what we normally use, or did you just over budget for the 13 million?
We, the amount we used by day varies quite a bit. Earlier this year, we were up around 27, 28 million gallons per day. Right now, because it's winter, not many people are irrigating. We're at much lower daily demand. It's looked at two different ways. So there's two different things we have to calculate. Within the service contract with Jacobs, we have to select one of four categories, and that's are we over or under 17 million gallons per day, or 17.5 million gallons per day? And I think the next category is 23 million, and the next one above that I think is 28, if I remember correctly. We always pick 17.5, and what that means is that sets our monthly fixed contract price with CH, and then we pay incremental what we use over that amount, and that's an average annual MGD. So what we do in spring of every year, we get together and we look at, well, are we over or under the 17.5? Generally, we're over. I don't know exactly what we were over last year, but there's no penalty for, we would always pick the lower number and then incrementally pay the difference, because there's no penalty for doing that. We would never pick 23 million, pay that fixed amount, and not use that amount of water. So that gets fed into one category. Those same numbers are used to develop our budget. So we want to make sure that we have all of our bases covered in case we do this in really March, April, and refine the numbers and look at it again shortly before the board adopts the budget in June, is what do we think our water demand is going to be collectively for the year for all three partners. But what we don't know at that time is what will the summer look like. Is it a hot, dry summer? Is it cooler, maybe some rainy summer? And then the next winter, is it a dry winter or a wet winter? So we're really making a large guess as to what the weather is going to be, and therefore our demands are going to be. So we want to make sure we have everything covered. So we're always going to be a little bit conservative on that. We have reduced our conservatism, if that's the right way to say it, over the past couple of years, because we used to plan for a 5% annual growth. The first couple of years, that never happened. So we actually cut back our demand forecasting. But that's something I feel that we would rather be on the conservative side than overspend by $500,000 or $1 million by the end of the year.
I think that's fair.
Okay. Well, again, I think that was a very fine update, and I thank you for that. Items 5 and 6 are basically the implementation of those augmentations necessary to do that repair work to the levee. I think we can probably go right to motions if that's okay with my colleagues. Motion to consider the contract or to approve the contract amendment for ESA and West Coast Associates. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second. Further discussion? There being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed. Motion carries. All right, item 6, consider the contract amendment for West Yost for services related to the EPA requirements for risk and resiliency, as we just heard discussed. Is there a motion?
Second.
Okay, motion and second, to approve the contract amendment to provide for the requirements of the risk and resiliency program. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. That concludes those items. Next one might require a little more explanation. This is item 7, to consider the non-exclusive parking lot use agreement with RD 2035 and Mendocino Railway regarding use of a portion of the joint intake facility site. I don't know if you actually explained this prior. I heard it mentioned early in your report.
Yeah, it's a relatively simple agreement. So, as you know, the agency and RD 2035 jointly own the intake facility, and we have a relatively large parking area that was used during construction. Most of it we don't really use anymore. We have our 2 entrances to the intake, and we have our own fenced-in parking area that we do use. Mendocino Railroad, it's really Sierra Northern Railroad, or a company doing business together, has their excursion train set up just south of our intake facility. And they had requested that they be able to actually improve and then use a portion of our parking area at the south side of our intake for excursion train visitor parking. It's a three-party agreement between RD 2035, the agency, and the railroad. We included some provisions to make sure that they maintain the parking lot, that they do trash collection. I do see a bit of a benefit in that there would be more people around to help protect our facility from vandalism, because it is kind of out by itself. There's no cost to the agreement. They're not paying us. We're not requesting any payment for them. Partly, that's because it's only a one-year agreement. And it's also a non-exclusive agreement in that if we need the parking area for some reason, if we're doing a tour or the crane we're renting is coming in, they have to move out for us. RD 1600 also uses that area for flood fight staging. They maintain the levees along the Sacramento River, and so they've always used that piece of property for flood fight staging. So they also have priority use over the railroad.
So the essence of it is we're giving them the use of the place for free in exchange for upgrades and sort of eyes and ears on the ground. Any questions of staff on this one? Ready for motion?
What can we extract from 2035 in order to allow them to use our parking lot? That's what I want to know.
It's their parking
I
lot
know,
too,
I
though.
It's already tied to annexation of the property between the RTs.
Yeah.
Tim, I do have one quick question. I'm not an engineer or a geologist in any way, but how many cars will fit on that lot? And if it's a bunch of cars, could it affect the grading, the integrity of the levees?
We used that levee's been there for, other than the part that we affected by construction, the levees mainly has been there for over 100 years. And we did use it for construction staging for the construction of the joint intake. So I feel the levee itself is pretty solid. I don't recall if I actually saw a parking stall layout there. I don't think we've ever seen that in terms of how they would actually park cars. They said they're going to paint lines. There's not going to be any permanent markers. They would just paint lines out for parking. But I'm not sure how many cars they plan to bring. I heard at one point their business plan calls for 20,000 visitors per year. And I don't know how they plan that being spread out throughout the year.
Yes, Paul.
I know we talked about this, but I forgot, is there any concern that if there's going to be visitors there and folks of different ages, I mean, do they have access to the riverside of the levee? Is there any, I mean, you don't want A, people accessing our facility, or B,
There is access to the
We
riverside
under-
of the levee, yes. Our
they're gonna
fence
get the
only
creeks
really goes
today.
around the joint intake facility itself.
so will
plus
this be fenced off? So as
Um,
not to create a liability issue?
We'd have to check that with RD 1600, because there may be
Okay.
another issue with access for maintenance.
Yeah.
And the Central Valley
I'd be
Flood
safe.
Protection Authority doesn't allow fences to
Are
go
there
into the levee.
cameras
prison.
out there? Tim, are there cameras out there?
Yes. Yeah, we have cameras on the facility that that CH can watch in the water treatment plant themselves.
So when the cameras go off, does it ring your cell phone?
No, it rings Jacob's cell phone.
All right, if there's no further discussion, is there a motion to allow us to go forward with this agreement?
I'll make that
Oh,
motion.
Wait, before you do that,
Pardon me?
Counsel, do you have any comment on, is this going to hurt?
I've reviewed the agreement, and my edits and comments have been incorporated.
Okay.
So Brett has made the motion. Is there a second to Brett's motion?
Second.
So
Okay.
before we vote, I do have a couple comments. So the fact that it's 1 year, I think the comments that Rich brought up in terms of the quantity of use and whether it's disruptive, I think also Paul's, questions about access. I mean, we can evaluate that. Obviously, we don't want to create a hazard, whether we're liable or not. We don't want to create a hazard for, either the property or the visitors to the train that, the kids wander off and fall into the river or something. I'd also say that I didn't recognize the name Mendocino, and so I looked it up and realized it was Sierra.
Hart.
And just sort of looked at the various rides, and actually some of them look pretty fun. So
Maybe we ought to have the board get to ride clause in that
Yeah,
contract.
maybe we can go on one of their excursion rides.
Yeah, let's work
Third
that.
parking spot.
We'll evaluate the condition of the levies.
Yeah, I think that's, it's fact finding.
I know that I'm sure that Will and his kids would love to go on some of these rides as described at their website. But anyway, no, I thought it was interesting, but I just wanted to add that in.
Thank you. Up to item, do we vote on
No,
that?
we need a
If
vote.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item 8 is the long-range board calendar. I would like to mention that I always appreciate after adjournment having the next meeting date indicated on the agenda. It's just a little helpful thing. If you would, when you, in future agendas, after adjournment, a sentence, next meeting will be held on, and the date and time. Just as helpful, I usually verify in my calendar that I have entered it. So you might at this time let us know when our next meeting is.
4/16.
Yeah, it is in the last page of the board packet. It is April 16th
Thank you.
in Davis.
I like it on the agenda.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, anything else on the long-range board calendar?
I'll just let you know that our alternate, Matt Dulcich, will be attending for me on that meeting, the 16th of April. I'll be away.
All right.
FYI.
I hope it's for fun.
It is.
Good. All right. There's nothing else on the long-range board calendar then?
Nothing surprising. We'll have a budget preview at that time for
All
the
right.
next fiscal year budget. And then we're planning on the update to the water security study, and then our normal
almost done.
GM and ops updates.
Okay. So that brings us to board member comments.
Doesn't even
Camille?
say here.
Except she's got something to look forward to. That's good. Rich?
No, thank you.
Brett? Will? Well, I'd just like to mention that this is our treasurer's last meeting. And he's been involved in this from the very beginning. And
Why is it your last?
and a lot of the great things that have been done are due to him. In terms, particularly the whole financing of it was so well done. It was a team effort. Everybody helped. But Paul, we thank you for your manifold contributions to the evolution of this JPA. Thank you.
While at the city of Davis as well, right?
This guy worked both sides of the
both
street,
sides of
you know? and he's down the center line with the JPA.
Yeah, no doubt.
We were waiting your memoir
Yeah.
with bated breath. All right, I think that's probably all our business for today. So again, we're meeting on April 16th, 3 o'clock in the city of Davis. And Paul?
Yeah, just a corollary to that, I will talk to Dick and Tim. The JPA actually has a formal agreement that speaks to the treasury function and the roles, so I suspect that might be an item to take up at your April board meeting.
Good idea.
Staff can come forward with a recommendation for seamless transition.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. There being nothing further today, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.